Are the Maple Leafs going to push the chips all the way in while in Vegas tonight? We'll discuss that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf Center podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Just a couple of days away from the NHL trade deadline, Dave, coming down the wire. We're to the final, 72 hours until deadline day. Pretty excited, my friend.
Yeah, I'm preparing myself for a full day on the desk.
Yeah. What's that look like for you? What's that look like for you? Someone who's working the desk at Sportsnet here in Toronto, in Canada. Like, this is a big day for people like yourself. What does that look like? Give pull the curtain back for those who don't know.
Well, like I usually have a dual monitor screen, as many know on the podcast, where I have a little bit of a workstation. That gets doubled because we have broadcasts going, we got Twitter feeds going, email chains, chat, a couple of chats. So there's a lot to keep an eye on. The worst thing that can happen on an NHL trade deadline day is when big news breaks in another sport. Do you remember what the Blue Jays did one year during an NHL trade deadline? Or was it free agency? It might have been free agency.
Free agency would have been July 1. So
yeah, this wasn't a July 1 free agency because it was not long after COVID, so everything got delayed. Do you remember when they fired Charlie Montoyo on a free agency day?
Oh, yeah. I forgot that was on free agency.
Oh, I didn't forget that.
Yeah, that's pretty big news to have to also scoot in there when on a day like free agency. It's like free agency and trade deadline. Those are two big days in the sports world where it's all hands on deck and it's busy. And then then you got the weekend. So it's nice it's on a Friday, very busy, and then the weekend you can just get back into hockey. But we know the Maple Leafs are active right now when it comes to the trade deadline. Brad Treliving is out there making phone calls. He's trying to figure out how can he best equip his team to try and win a Stanley Cup this year. Because let's be honest, Dave, like that still is the goal. I don't think that gets brought up enough where it's, this team still believes that they can win. And well, why wouldn't they? You look at how the season has unfolded. They're currently, as it stands right now, at the top of the table in the Atlantic Division, a very tough, difficult Atlantic Division. The team has won a lot of games. So 38, 20, and 3 or something like that on the season. Like, this is a team that's won a lot of games. They've proven that they can win. They can win in multiple different ways. They can squeak out victories. They can get it done. They're playing with a little bit more chip on their shoulder. And they're getting great goaltending, whether it's from Joseph Woll or it's Anthony Stolarz. I think the team has played well enough to prove that they can possibly get something done this year and go on a run if they can get the one or two extra pieces needed to kind of fill in those holes that remain. I think that they've done enough to prove that the Leafs should push the chips all in this year.
Yeah, and you're not getting as many, cracks at it. Like, this is a very tough division. Like the last month, the Leafs have had a pretty impressive record, and they hardly have any breathing. Like, they have no breathing room, right, in this division, right? It's a dogfight, right? So I know some people say, Florida made a deal, now the Leafs have to respond. Some people will be like, no, I don't think you should be that reactive. In a way, you kind of have to be, because this is the team you're going to, there's a very high likelihood you're playing Florida at some point in the playoffs. Could be round one. If you get out of round one, could be round two, right? So you have to be ready for what everyone else is doing. And I know sometimes you don't want to be too reactive to what's going on around you, but in a way, you have to be ready to, if you're in a position where you're signing your top players to big deals and things like that, you're basically telling your fan base that we're locking in this core because we believe in this core can get it done. Nothing says it more than going out and and making these trades, which is they've done literally every single year since when Tavares came.
Yeah, I mean, you think back, I think like the first time they kind of pushed the chips in, you could look back. I mean, really pushing in probably what, Foligno? Was that the first time that we kind of saw them really push them in and get multiple pieces and try and put things together? Like, I mean, they've always been aggressive and they've added a lot of players, but Foligno, the O'Reilly year, I think was probably the most aggressive they've been. But they turn over the roster like by a third that season. I don't think it'll be that aggressive. I don't think the Leafs need to be that aggressive. I think, yes, they clearly need help down the middle with top 9 centermen, and they could definitely use a bottom 4 right shot defenseman, but that's really it. Like I think they've got enough players that can play a fourth line role pretty competently. I think they've clearly had their top 6 pretty much situated at this point. So, it's really just 2 main spots that I think the Leafs know they have to fill, and that's what they're going to look to do between now and Friday's deadline. So, a top 9 centerman who preferably can kill penalties and get some tough defensive matchups and excel in that role. And then, a similar player defensively who can partner up with Morgan Riley and also get some tough matchups and alleviate a little bit of stress on Tanev and McCabe, but also just, you can trust putting those guys out there in any situation, Morgan Riley and whoever his partner is. That's kind of what we're looking for, I think, through this deadline. That's how Brad Treliving wins this deadline. If he goes and addresses those 2 holes, I think the team will be set for a pretty solid playoff run here, Dave.
Yeah, I think you're looking at all the teams that have made big, like all the contending teams that have gone to win a Stanley Cup these last few years. You look at their deadlines. Some have made big moves, but not many have made like that earth-shattering move, because in a lot of ways they believe in their core and what they have in their core, and they just need to add that little piece that can give them a better chance, right? Yeah, maybe Vegas is one where they've gone and made those big deals, but like
they're an anomaly for everything.
Yeah, everything. Like they're always big on everything. Like Tampa has made some, decent deals, but they haven't gone out and made like an earth-shattering deal right at the trade deadline to push them over the edge. You kind of already have the pieces in play. You're just adding that one little component, that you think can just give you that little extra push that you need.
Yeah, that Nick Paul, right? Like Nick Paul was, one of the bigger guys that they added at that time to kind of push him over the top. And yeah, I agree. So I don't think we'll see, the Leafs enter the Mikko Rantanen sweepstakes or the Brock Besser sweepstakes, but there are a decent amount of centermen out there and a couple of defensemen that I think the Leafs have been calling on. There are reports of them being interested on a number of players, and a little later on in today's show, we're gonna go and pretty much do like a top 10 list, but we're gonna do it in a different way. We're gonna kind of draft our free agent or our trade deadline targets. So guys who we would like the Leafs to go out and target. We'll do a 5-round draft. So that'll give us a chance to talk about 10 possible targets for the Maple Leafs at the deadline. We'll do that next. And we'll also tee up tonight's game. Leafs and Vegas. I almost mixed them together and called them the Leafs, the Golden Knights. But Leafs and Vegas down at T-Mobile Arena tonight. We'll preview that game for you next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game faces off, the NHL action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening faceoff or you want to bet on a third period comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment exciting, whether I'm back backing my favorite team for a late game rally or picking a player to score a goal, I never feel like I'm missing my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you here as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, bringing you brand new episodes of the Locked On Leafs podcast. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. That's up on Apple, Spotify, and wherever else you download your audio pods. And you can also find us on YouTube as well. Hit subscribe and hit the notification bell as well so you know exactly when new content is getting dropped each and every day. It's all Leafs all the time here in the Locked On Leafs podcast. We got a game tonight, Leafs and Vegas down in LV, and the Maple Leafs won the earlier matchup between these two 3-0. They blanked the Golden Knights back in November. Very difficult thing to do because this Vegas team, man, they can score, and they've been on fire lately. Winners of 5 of the last 6 games, and although Toronto's won a bunch here, Dave, their play has been dipping. It's been a little concerning. They're going to have to get back to, asserting themselves as a dominant team if they want to try and win a game against this Vegas Golden Knight squad tonight.
Yeah, it just seems like there's been lapses, right? They they lose focus, or they haven't. They try to do like the not putting in the full effort, hoping that they can get enough goals, or turn it on at the right point in the game and just kind of take the game over. It ain't gonna happen with Vegas. Vegas, if they get going, it's tough to stop them, right? They are, Bruce Cassidy has that team working on like a fine machine, right? He in a way he's got a lot of the similar traits to Berube, where it's like very much no nonsense. But I think Cassidy usually takes it a little bit more. Like I remember times where Jack Eichel was getting called out by Bruce Cassidy for not playing the right way.
Yeah.
Right. He's got that team plays very responsibly. The Leafs, they've done some good things, but they've also, they've had some bad habits
here. They've squeaked out some wins, but they haven't looked dominant. I think that's the problem with Toronto. Like, they've won 5 of their last 6 games coming out of the Four Nations face-off. I think 8 of their last 10 games that they've won in total since February 1st. So they've been winning a lot, but it hasn't looked great, especially coming out of the Four Nations break. That little road trip heading in when they were out west, I thought they played well. That game against Edmonton, Calgary, Seattle, and then obviously they suffered that loss to Vancouver. But then they came back and it's kind of been, so-so, right? Like they got off to a hot start against Carolina and then kind of pissed it away. Right. They were in a close game against Chicago, and then they were in tough with Boston. And then obviously you look at the San Jose loss the other night, and it's like, okay, these are teams you should be winning and picking up points quite handily. This is a game where if you play the same way, right, lackadaisical, it's just not going to go well. You got to protect your net. You got to make sure that they're going all out, generating scoring chances, which is something they have not done a whole lot as of late. And they got to get that secondary scoring. Now, they have played really well on the road. Like, let's call it as it is. They've been one of the best road teams in the NHL. I think they're 12-3 or 13-3 the last 16 road games, and they've been the highest scoring road team over that span. So Toronto's played well on the road, so they're heading into Vegas, and hopefully they can channel that as opposed to channeling what we saw, the nonsense against the Sharks the other night when they were in town here in Toronto. Let's take a look at the game preview here. Look at these two teams pitted up against each other. So the Maple Leafs and Vegas Golden Knights, both teams who are sitting pretty in a playoff spot. Two teams winning a lot of games this year. Toronto has obviously We talked about their road success, but man, it's tough to go into Vegas. That's a tough team to beat in their own building. And that's a team that can score. They're averaging 3.3 goals per game, and they're limiting opponents to just 2.73 goals. I'd imagine we'll see Aiden Hill in net. He got a shutout the other night against the Devils, so I think they'll roll into him. And that's a really tough goaltender to beat, especially when he's in Vegas. They've got a top tier power play at 28.5%. The Leafs got to be sharp on special teams, and maybe they could try and take control of this penalty kill. Maybe the lone weakness from Vegas, a 77% penalty kill, ranks 20th in the NHL. I think that's where Toronto's going to have to take advantage and score an extra goal or two tonight to come away with a victory.
Yeah, 22-6-3 at home. Like we talked about, actually, I think on the last pod, like teams like Vegas take advantage of those opportunities at home. It's funny, they don't really have a good away record. Like they've relied a lot on their play at home, and I look at this Vegas team, and they've done an impressive job of just keeping this run going. Of there's been times where I hear about like Bruce Cassidy's a coach that eventually things kind of fizzle out with him, and the players start to the message doesn't come through. I don't think that's really been the case for Vegas this year, especially, right? They weren't in the Pacific lead. They kind of taken advantage of the Oilers dipping in their play, and they obviously
losing to Anaheim.
Yeah, right.
Last night too, the Oilers.
So, like they've seized an opportunity, and we know that Vegas is going to want to make a big move at the deadline. They don't have a lot of holes in their lineup. I think that's probably the big thing with them is like Kelly McCrimmon looks at this team and is like, we need to get another center. Okay, let's trade for Thomas Hertl. Oh, we need a top 4 defenseman. Let's go get Noah Hannafin.
Well, right? Let's look at that lineup, Dave. You're talking about it. Why don't we take a peek at what the lineup is going to look like for the Vegas Golden Knights skating out there tonight at T-Mobile Arena? So, yeah, you mentioned it. Down the middle, they got Eichel, Hertl, Howden, and Nicola Waugh. You got Olofsson, Eichel, and Mark Stone as the first line, Dorofeyev, Hertl, and Brandon Saad. On the second line, Barbashev, Howden, and Kolesar on your third line. And then Pearson, Waugh, and Lavoie as your fourth line. And, yeah, I mean, they needed centermen, and they went out, they picked up Eichel, and they picked up Hertl. They went and they signed Brandon Saad when he became a free agent, and that's
I guarantee many people forgot about that because I almost half forgot about it.
I did too until I saw that he was in the lineup. And how's he done since he got there? Has he even actually produced anything? 8 games, 2 goals, 3 points. So he hasn't done a whole lot. Playing 15 minutes a game, he's got 3 points so far, but still getting his legs underneath him there, I suppose. But that Dorofeyev kid, he's up to like 24 goals. He's having a good season, so he's someone who could provide some secondary scoring. Barbashev has been a good goal scorer for them for a couple of years. Like you got Tanner Pearson and Nick Waugh on your fourth line. Like it's just a deep team. Like they can roll all 4 lines and feel good about it, both offensively and defensively. So I think that's what makes them a pretty scary team. And as we saw, you look at their expected goals at 5-on-5. I think it was 52 or 53% of the goals are in Vegas's favor at 5-on-5, and that's a big reason for it. They've got forwards who can play 200-foot game, and defensively, yeah, they're missing Shea Theodore, so it looks a little bit bleaker than what it looked like before. But Pietrangelo, Hannafin, Zach Whitecloud, Nick Hag, Braden McNabb, still some pretty solid defensemen out there. And I believe Aiden Hill likely to get the start for them in goal.
Yeah, they veered away from Samsonov in that first time. We thought maybe Samsonov would play against the Leafs, and they're like, no, we'll let Aiden Hill deal with that. We don't want to put Samsonov out there.
Yeah, and Samsonov's last 2 starts, Dave, he gave up 5 goals to Chicago and 5 goals to LA. So I don't think they're going to be too keen to get him back in the pipes, considering Aiden Hill's last start. Oh, just a 2-0 win over to the Devils.
Yeah. Sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, I'd probably go with Aiden Hill also. Who's going to be shooting on Aiden Hill? Let's take a look at the Leafs lineup heading into tonight's game against the Vegas Golden Knights. Austin Matthews still up at the tippy top of the first line with Mitch Marner, Nyes. Really not much expected to change. Now, there was no practice on Tuesday for us to know if there's going to be any game day changes, but this is as of now. We believe it'll be Nyes, Matthews, Marner, Holmberg, Tavares, and Nylander, McMahon, Domi, and Robertson with Dewar, Camp, and Cali Yarncroc. I'll be honest with you, Dave. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if we did see some changes, like if Pontus Holmberg kind of swaps maybe with Yarncroc and you get to see Yarny get pushed up the lineup a little bit now that he's got a game under his belt, or maybe McMahon goes up to the second line. He could put Yarncroc with Domi and Robertson and put Holmberg back on the fourth line. I think one of those two would make some sense if we're going to see a lineup change here from Craig Berube.
Yeah, and I mean, you first game with Yarncroc back, you don't want to maybe push him too much. You can't, I mean, give him a chance to get his legs under him a little bit, but he only played like 8.5 minutes in his debut, so season debut. So I would hope that at some point we're gonna see a little bit more of Cali Yarncroc than him being on the fourth line. I obviously it's unlikely we would see that third line get switched up unless they're not great defensively.
They didn't look that great in the game against San Jose, though. That's the thing.
We know, but we know they're road vultures. They love those road matchups.
This is true. Yeah, well, we looked up the stat yesterday. What was it? Yeah. 12 goals in the last 10 games 13 goals in the last 10 games for Nick Robertson and Bobby McMahon on the road. Last 10 road games. So one of those two. Maybe we'll see one of those two hit the score sheet tonight. They'll need the secondary scoring because Vegas, they could score. They can. And if we see Joseph Wall in that tonight, which could happen, it may be a bit of a shootouts in this one potentially. And the Leafs are going to need to score 3, 4, 5 goals to beat the Vegas Golden Knights. All right, Dave. Why don't we take a quick break and then let's come back and let's get into the trade deadline targets. Who could the Leafs be interested in? We'll do a little draft. Give us a chance to talk about a number of different players. So, little trade deadline chat coming up on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti, and we are just a couple of days away from the NHL trade deadline, and the Maple Leafs expected to be a rather active team. It's a group that we think has Stanley Cup aspirations, but probably need to fill a couple of holes to get there. I will say this, one player that was on the Leafs deadline target board, I would say, is off the board now. Jake Evans signing a 4-year extension in Montreal. He was one of those guys who I think the Leafs thought potentially could be, third or fourth line center. He was a right shot, so he kind of filled that need, could kill penalties, a physical player. So Jake Evans was a potential target for Toronto. No more. The Montreal Canadiens decided to keep Jake Evans moving forward and sign him to an extension instead. So an already thin list of centers available at the deadline just got a wee bit thinner, which means, I don't know, perhaps that tertiary group of guys, that secondary group of guys, maybe even that is going to start to get more expensive as player names start to come off the board here. Guys, like a Yanni Gourde or Scott Lawton or whoever. So it'll be interesting to see what the prices turn out to be come Friday at 3 p.m. But let's not waste any more time, Dave. We're doing, kind of an interesting take on a top 10 trade deadline targets list. But we're going to do a draft. So guys who we believe the Leafs should target the most. So, your first round all the way through fifth round picks will be guys that if Toronto has the assets and the team says yes, those players at the top of the board should go, should get the nod first, should be prioritized in a deal. So that's kind of the parameters of what we're thinking here. And it's obviously guys who are available and players that the Maple Leafs are in on or have reportedly been interested in. We're not, going out trading for Connor McDavid or anything stupid like that. So it makes sense for the guys that we're looking at. So why don't we start off, Dave? You want to go first? You want the first overall selection here in the NHL trade deadline targets draft?
I usually go first, so I'm going to be the gentleman this time and let you go first.
Oh, you're going to let me go first. Okay, yeah. I like it. I don't like it, actually, because this means that you get
the pressure's on.
Well, you'll get a little peek into my strategy a little here. But I'll be honest, if the Maple Leafs, and they have limited assets anyways, so if they had to allocate their assets toward one player, I really, really honestly believe it should be a guy like Ryan O'Reilly. And whether or not he wants to come here is a totally different conversation. But if the Maple Leafs can get Ryan O'Reilly, I think that fits a lot of needs. He's somebody who comes in, he's got terms, so he can play, the next couple of years, can move up and be that second line center. He could be the third line center right now. Maybe that kicks Tavares down to 3C and O'Reilly plays on the second line, but he's a guy who can come in, give you 200 feet of hockey. He's got that familiarity with Coach Craig Berube. He can pop in some offense. He's responsible defensively. He, Selke-ish candidate type of player year in, year out. The contract isn't terrible. Couple more years left at 4.5 with the cap rising. That's really not a whole lot. I think Ryan O'Reilly is going to be a better player over the next 2 years than a guy like Braden Shen, which is why I have him higher on my list. Will Nashville move him? Does he want to leave? Does he want to come to Toronto? Those are questions I don't know. But in this exercise, who do I want? Ryan O'Reilly's at the top of the list for guys I want, and that could make the biggest splash on this Maple Leafs roster. So I'll select Ryan O'Reilly with the number 1 overall pick.
All right. That makes a lot of sense. I know you're a huge Ryan O'Reilly fan. I just don't know if Nashville's going to make that move, because the problem is they can't do a full sell. I mean, technically, if you're moving O'Reilly, I guess that's not selling, but they are probably going to want to get back on track sooner rather than later. So I think they're going to keep him around and maybe just move off players who are more, that have less term on their deals. So that's why I think we've heard the name all week for the longest time. I still think that they're going to probably push to make that Braden Shen their top target. And I think that would be the top target for me, just because the fit makes a lot of sense. It gives you a little bit of peace of mind just in case things break down with John Tavares in contract talks, or, they decide that they want to make a little bit of an adjustment of his role going forward. You then have a Braden Shen on the books. I know that the age is a bit of a concern with that contract, but I think the fit with, obviously O'Reilly would fit too with Craig Berube and their past experience. The second best option out of that would be Braden Shen.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you. That's the next best center, I think, that's out there between him and someone who may come up a little later on my list, I guess. But with my second pick, if Ryan O'Reilly is not there, Braden Shen is not there, I think I probably decide to prioritize. Now, you know what? I'm actually going to go with the third best center on the market, because I still think that 3C is such an important role, because it not only allows them to fill that role at 3C, but if they get the right guy, it can alleviate a lot of pressure off of John Tavares. And although there's a player that I think is better, a better overall player and can go up and down your lineup, I think Scott Laughton is the better fit for Toronto. So for me, I would be prioritizing Scott Laughton over any of the other centers that are available outside of O'Reilly and Braden Shen. Again, pretty cheap. He's got a contract into next year too, so you got him locked up for 2 seasons, and he can play 200 feet of hockey, right? He's got that grit. He's not a guy who's played a lot of playoff hockey, but I think that he's the type of player who would excel in playoff hockey. Mm-hmm. So for me, Scott Laughton is a great fit with this group. So I'm going to take him with my second pick.
And I'll say this about Scott Laughton because he would have been my next pick. I was actually bounced between him and Shen. And the other reason I thought of it too is the Leafs really are trying to get teams to retain salary on any addition that they bring in. So Laughton's deal is a lot easier going forward at $3 million to get that retention done rather than going and getting a Braden Shen retained. And that's going to be a lot more costly. And I don't know if the Leafs want to be focusing their assets on trying to get that retention done.
Well, that's it. And I ultimately truly believe that Lawton will cost like half as much as what St. Louis is asking for Shen.
And he's younger.
And he's a little bit younger. Yeah,
Yeah.
slightly younger. And, I think can do a lot of the similar roles that that Shem will be asked to do if he's the guy who's here. All right. Who's your second pick, Dave? No Shen, no Lawton, no Ryan O'Reilly. Who's next on your pecking order?
I'm focusing on the blue line. Focusing on the blue line, and I'm gonna go with probably the least expensive option first, and that's Luke Shen.
All right, so you're getting the Shen brothers as your first two picks here. Luke Shen.
Going in on the Shen. I'm going in on the Shen bandwagon here. Like, the fit's there. He's the type of defenseman that they need to go up against a Florida and a Tampa.
Yeah.
Especially Florida, with the way that they play. You need I know that some people would really want to go out and get, that flashy defenseman. Like Seth Jones, I could have talked myself into that. But I don't think they would have been able to match what Florida gave up because they don't have a Spencer Knight type of player for Chicago to say, oh yeah, we can do that deal.
Hildeby doesn't have that type of cash yet.
No, he doesn't, right?
I'm pretty sure Spencer Knight also put up like a 41.
I was about to say he had 41 saves in his first game in a 5-1 victory. So I do think that with Shen, you at least know that you got that big body experience. I think is key for that. And it always seems like Morgan Rielly plays a lot better when he has a defenseman like that on his pairing, and you get that right shot defenseman. And look, if something were to happen to one of your other defensemen, like a Tanev, you've got Shen that can kind of step in and play a bit more of the penalty killing roles and all those things. And it just also pushes other guys down that, you can get all of Ekman Larsson onto that third pairing. So one of Benoit or Timmins do not have to play as much as, we hope.
I need to make sure because you didn't take the player that I was thinking about grabbing, and I'm curious if he's even on like the trade bait board, because I for the parameters, I thought it was fair that we look at guys who are on like the TSN trade bait board, so that we're not taking anyone who's like random. I just want to make sure that this player is on it because he might not actually be, which is why I probably will steer clear of it because I thought you were going to go there a second ago, but it does not appear.
I'm curious who you're thinking of that.
Well, the player that I was thinking was Rasmus Anderson was the one player that I was thinking, but it does not appear that he is on the trade bait board. The other one was Noah Dobson, like two guys who have term, and there have been slight rumors like, Dobson changed. He changed agencies, and it was like, could there be something going on with Dobson? The Islanders falling out of it. Could they look to make something? And if they would love to make a deal, that should be something the Maple Leafs should be all over. But if those two guys are not eligible for our list, I'm going to put them aside. So I'm actually going to stick with the center options. Like if we strike out on Ryan O'Reilly, they strike out on Braden Shen, they strike out on Scott Lawton, I still think this team is desperate to bring in a center. I think Brock Nelson is probably the next best player to bring in. And look, the Islanders, they're kind of falling out of it a little bit here. They're now 3 points back of a playoff spot. They haven't won a lot of games of late. I know that I'm pretty sure they won last night, but it's a team that's, lost for the last 10 games. So I think the Islanders are starting to fall out of it a wee little bit, and there's no contract extension in place for Brock Nelson, which I know was a bit of a discussion. And if he's not, then I'm sure the Islanders would look to try and get something for him. And again, he's someone who can come in, give you some very credible third line center minutes. He can go up and down your lineup. He can move to the wing if need be. He can score, like this guy's scored 30 plus goals 3 years in a row. Like, he can score. He's still scoring to this point, and he can kill penalties as well, and he's quite responsible defensively. So a guy like Brock Nelson, I think, brings a lot of intangibles to the list. So I think he'll be more expensive than Scott Lawton because he has that offensive upside. But I think that he's also somebody that can easily fill in that 3C role and potentially someone you look to extend. Possibly you get a good look at him. I don't know, but I think Brock Nelson would be the next player that I'd be looking to acquire if we're down to the fourth center on the board.
Yeah, I think Nelson makes a lot of. There's not a lot of players who have that offensive ability that he brings, and also can play on the penalty kill, right? Like there aren't, and there's a reason why New York was trying to get a deal done with him because they truly believe that he is a guy you can win with. I just don't know if the Leafs want to go down the rental option if they're going to have to give up the assets that's going to take to acquire. Like, if you're going to use those assets, go and get a Scott Lawton. At least you have cost certainty.
This is with the assumption that Lawton's been traded already, Ryan O'Reilly's been traded, Chen's been traded. We can't strike out. We got to bring in center. Nelson's next best.
I do think that if I'm ranking the centers, he's probably next. Like the no-brainer, you just go on and get him. Because the other options, and I don't even want to draft any of the other options because it's Yanni Gourde.
Yanni Gourde would be the next guy for me. And I actually think it's quite close between Gourde and Nelson. And it's mainly because of the defensive factor. Like, he's someone who can play defensively. He's very responsible in his own end. He can win faceoffs. He's a winner. He's won a Stanley Cup before. Just not a whole lot of offense. Like, he's got like 6 goals this year or something. Yeah. He just came back from injury too, so he got a game in. Last night he played for the Kraken, so he's healthy, or at least he's played in a game, so we know that he's back into the lineup. So that is kind of like an honorable mention. The guy, if you strike out on Nelson, that probably is like the last remaining third line center that you still could get. But yeah, you're if that's your big ad down the middle, it's like, that's a so deadline, right? Yeah. Who's your next pick?
Next for me, I don't know if it's going to happen, but if I had to decide that center is not available, Shen's deemed to not be available, and you know what? Let's go out and make a big splash. Go and get Colton Parayko.
Oh, yeah.
I've talked myself more into this lately. The only reason I would have said no to Colton Parayko is because of his age and contract, but he is really good defensively, and he's actually, can help provide a little bit of offense on the blue line too. He's got 13 goals, right? Like, I think he has 13 goals. I have to see.
He's got more, actually.
I think he's actually scored more since I wrote this down a little bit, and I had to remember if I actually.
He got 15 or 16 now.
He is at 15 goals. Sorry, 15 goals and 34 points. We know this team not only needs to add a bit, beef up the blue line. I mean, you can't beef it up more than Colton Parayko, but you need some offense from that blue line. Like, it's gotten a little better, but you need and look, you're not asking him to play a lot of minutes too, because you can spread the minutes around. And I just think before, I don't think St. Louis would have considered it, but now we're kind of hearing that there's a lot of interest. And for me, it's like, if you're comfortable going out and getting a Braden Shen, you'd be equally as comfortable doing the Colton Parayko move. And I just, watching him at the Four Nations, I say, yeah, he would be a nice ad, because he doesn't, teams aren't going to, forecheckers aren't going to go up with a Colton Parayko and be like, yeah, we're going to come and intimidate you. Can't intimidate a guy who's 6'6", 228 pounds.
Yeah. No, it's tough to do. JT Miller tried. He found out that it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Punch yourself in the face instead of punching him.
Yeah. Didn't turn out well for Miller. Okay, I like that pick, Parayko. I mean, yeah, if you strike out on those, you're like, let's go big buck hunting. I like Parayko as an option. we'll try and speed through these next couple. We're running up against it for time. I'm going to the blue line, and if Luke Schen's already gone, I guess Connor Murphy's still a player that I do have a lot of time for. I think he's a really good player. He's getting up there. He's now like 30 years old, but he's a big boy, 6'4", 210, 215. He can throw around his weight. He's a right shot, defensive defenseman. The analytics, the underlying numbers are decent for a guy who's playing in Chicago and not very good team, one of the worst teams in the NHL. And he's got, some experience playing with Jake McCabe. Like those two were paired up with each other when they were in Chicago. So, I think you originally bring him in to play him with Morgan Riley and see how that works out. And then, if Tanev gets hurt or something, that there's some familiarity there with McCabe, and you still have like a formidable shutdown pair. So he's someone who can kill penalties too, and dish out a lot of hits. So I think that Connor Murphy's got one more year left on his deal also at a very, respectable $4 million cap hit. So to me, that would be my next option if I were Brad Treliving. And he would be, I guess, number 7 on the big board for us. Who do you got as your 4th pick in this draft?
Okay, so just looking at here at the available options.
No Riley, no Schenn brother, Lawton, Nelson, Parayko, or Connor Murphy. So all those guys dealt to other teams. Who you calling next?
I would call the Seattle Kraken see if Jamie Alexiak being a potential option.
Alexiak, okay.
He wouldn't be my first second option, but I think he could help this blue line provide a little better options in your bottom 4 than what you currently have, in my opinion.
Yeah. He flips over to the right side, but he's a left shot defenseman.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I get a little held up on it. What's his contract? Is he a pending UFA?
I think he has one more year at 4.6. So I would need some retention on that.
Yeah. So I don't know if I love it. I don't know if I love Jamie Alex. I like the physicality. I like the thought of it. And I guess if that's the case, you keep him on the left and probably move. The problem is I don't think he's a good pair for Riley. Although I guess he could kind of fill in and be like the TJ Brody role where he did play well with a lefty before. Okay, Jamie Alexiak next on your list. I'm going to continue on the right side. I still think that Rasmus Ristolainen would be a pretty good player for the Maple Leafs to target and acquire if none of these other names are available. Go out and get Risto, right? I think that he's a player who has kind of resurged a little bit, right? He's kind of found his game again in Philly. He's a defensive defenseman. He's a big boy. We know how much Treliving loves his big boys. He can kill penalties, block shots, lay hits. He's got 2 more years left on that deal at 5.1. Would Philly be willing to retain some money? Perhaps get that down to a much more respectable cap hit that allows Toronto to make some more moves, maybe. So I think Rasmus Ristolainen would be at the top of my list of guys if everyone else has already gone and we're down to the final couple of minutes of the deadline. I'd be placing a phone call to Danny Briere to see what that would take.
Yeah, I think there's I think if you're hell bent on improving that blue line, wouldn't be a bad option to consider for sure.
All right, who was your 5th and final pick here? Everyone else is gone. Who's your final call going out to?
Probably going out to Utah. And with Utah, I don't know what their current situation is in terms of if they want to be a contender or not. But
yeah, they're only 4 points back currently of the Flames.
So they're still kind of in it. But I also wonder if they would give Nick Bjugstad, if they would be willing to move him. I think he's that center. He can play center for you. Add a little bit of size. I know that he's not the player he used to be, but I think right shot, and he did pretty okay for Edmonton when he got there. They liked what he brought defensively, and I know that it's a few years ago I would have probably had him higher on my list, but I still think maybe he'd be a worthwhile gamble. I thought maybe Michael McCarron, but I don't think he has the offensive upside to be that 3C. He's more of a 4C for me, but I think just adding that size down the middle and having a guy who's a little more help kill penalties, I think would be beneficial. So I'll throw Bukestad as kind of like a, if there's no other options, see if maybe you can get him for cheap.
Yeah, I like Bukestad as an option, someone who can go and try and acquire right side. Phil's, check some boxes here. The one other player that I kind of debated on, but he wasn't on the trade bait board, and that was kind of part of our parameters. But I wonder if Lule Morello will be willing to move on from J.G. Pajot, Jean-Gabriel Pajot, former Ottawa Senator, because again, right shot centerman, and he can provide a little bit of offense. He got 30 points this year in 58 games, 11 goals, 30 points in 58 games, and somehow he's a plus player on the Islanders, a +8 this year. We know he can kill penalties. He's good, strong in the faceoffs. So that would be an interesting player for me, JG Pajot. And he's come up big in the playoffs throughout his career. Remember that one run that they made with the Islanders a couple of years ago, and they also had that run with the Senators back in 2017. He had 8 goals in that run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals the year that they lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins. So, he's got a lot of playoff success, 86 games of playoff hockey under his belt. So he would be an interesting kind of under the radar player. Not sure if he's available. I don't know if he has a no trade clause or any trade protection, but Pajot is an interesting player for me as well. Kind of my honorable mention, I'll call it, if he is available for trade. Is there any honorable mention that you wanted to little under the radar deal that hasn't gotten a lot of pub recently that you think would be a nice little acquisition?
No, not really. It's tough. There's not a lot of like little deals I think, oh yeah, this would be an intriguing one. I don't really see it this year personally.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think pretty much the players we named, Luke Cunnin maybe is another guy that's been talked about a little bit here and there when it comes to the Maple Leafs. But outside of that, I think the 10 names we mentioned, like Ryan O'Reilly, the Shen brothers, Scott Lawton, Nelson, Parayko, Connor Murphy, Alexiak, Ristolainen, Bukestad, Pajot, and Luke Cunnin. I think those are the players that the Maple Leafs are looking at. Like those are the 12 guys, we'll call it, that maybe the Maple Leafs will try and pick 2 of them. Pick a defenseman, pick a centerman, and away we go. I'd be kind of surprised if there's another name out there that we haven't heard yet that they come away with at this deadline. I think one of these 12 names, probably 2 of these 12 names, end up being Maple Leafs by Friday at 3 p.m. We'll see. We'll see what happens, though, Dave. Fun stuff. Good list. Always enjoy doing stuff like that. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at _Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. Leafs game tonight, 10 p.m. puck drop. Leafs Golden Knights at 10 p.m. in Vegas. Enjoy the game. Go Leafs, go. Catch you back tomorrow. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.